Awesome. Yeah, I think we are good to go. We have 76 people here, which is quite nice a number, especially because we want to do a Q&A at the end. Minko, Alessia, who of you will start, or will you start together?
Yeah, so we were thinking Alessia can start first. After that, I can take over. I can share presentations for a presentation for about 10-15 minutes, and we can switch to Q&A. How does that sound?
Sounds great. Sounds great. Yeah, so in this case, it's really my pleasure to welcome both of you, Minko and Alessia. And yeah, as we say in Austria, the stage is yours, everything waltz.
Awesome. Very good. Very good. Well, it's my pleasure to be here. I consider myself a guest, to be honest, because I don't talk Angular every day as opposed to you guys. So I'm not here as an expert whatsoever. I had the big privilege. Okay, let me tell you a little bit about myself. I'm Google Cloud. I'm a cloud consultant in Google Cloud. I've been Google for exactly 2 years. In fact, I think yesterday marked 2 years precisely. And I deal with cloud and cloud services every day, and that's what I work on. And specifically, I work on conversational AI and AI in general. But I had the immense, really big privilege to do what we call a 20% project, participated in a 20% project with Minko's team, the Angular DevRel team at Google. And my work during that 20% project was around standalone components and how like to enable developers to get started with standalone components in Angular 14. So I wrote a code lab as part of the 20% project. The code lab was published in November. During the presentation, I will share just a like literally the overview of the code lab, and then I'll paste the link in the chat if you guys want to play with that. Now, with that said, I will try to share my screen. I attempted to do, okay, yes, okay, now I've got control over there.
We can't hear you. I think you're muted.
Yeah, for some reason you are muted.
Okay, I think immediately when I started sharing my screen, I was put on mute. I don't know why, but now I think you should be able to hear me and also see the deck, correct?
Yeah, awesome.
Very good. Okay. Oh, right. Okay. So let's have a little bit of an introduction about what components in the Angie module and the whole ecosystem and the whole framework looked like before the introduction of the standalone component. So, as you guys know really well, Angular applications are modular. And the whole modularity system goes around an ng module. In fact, the core component is actually a component itself, which is part of an ng module. And as we are seeing here, an ng module can actually reference multiple components. And that's actually how a component gets some dependencies. So it's the ng module itself that provides the dependencies for the component. Now, if you look at this, it becomes it's pretty intuitive to see that it becomes a little bit hard to understand what dependencies a particular component requires and needs. And that's pretty much actually what we one of the things that Angular 14 tries to fix, introduce in the concept of standalone components and pipes and also directives. So basically, a component now, component A, doesn't have to be part of an NG module. So it can actually be declared inside the app component itself, can be imported inside the app component itself. So we don't need a root module in application. Having said that, we can still have existing NG module context application that can still reference and use the standalone components. But the good thing, so as I said before, is that the component can specify its own dependencies without actually the need of an NG module. So now the applications, the components are standalone as such. So we actually, like we making life a lot easier in a way. It's the application becomes a lot more lighter, I would say, easy to figure out what dependencies a component requires, and so forth, and all the relationships between all the different modules and components. Okay, so this is the code lab. So when I started, the idea was to create a really simple, friendly, user-friendly, and beginner-friendly code lab. It was a very interesting journey for me, I would say, because as I said, I don't have a complex Angular background. I played with Angular many years ago. I was completely new to Angular 14 and, of course, the standalone components. And I think that actually did the trick itself, because I literally put myself in the shoes of those people that I've never seen the standalone components. So I try to ask myself lots of questions, and I try to play a lot with the components before I created the code lab. Let me switch briefly to the code lab itself. Okay, so this is how you would where you would land if you go to codelabsdevelopersgoogle.com, which you're probably familiar with. And if you just search for standalone, the core lab will pop up. The core lab, as I said, is actually it rotates. It's centered around a very simple application. It's an application that displays some of my photos. I'm a little bit obsessed with photography, and especially with wildlife photography, underwater photography. I thought that I didn't want to create anything particular complex from a UI perspective, from an application perspective. What I wanted to do was more like, let's have a simple application that's got its own root standalone component that references another standalone component, which is actually the widget that you see here. So this is the standalone component itself. It's a very simple widget that has got a form. It actually doesn't do what it claims to do, so it doesn't send an email, but that's, for those, actually, it's like the next development for those that want to go beyond the core lab itself. But it has the UI and know the logic, the business logic, to actually get the value of those fields and play with all the routes, and there's also a nice chat dialogue. The chat window that you see is real. It actually connects to Dialogflow CX. I said I've got a conversational AI background, so I created a little chatbot that provides some random facts around wildlife. That was just to add a little bit of gamification. So these are all the steps that are part of the Colab, from the environment setup to the creation of new application, the photos, as opposed to lots of Colabs. So this one actually expects you to create the application from scratch. Usually we provide like on GitHub 2 different branches, the full application and then the starter application, so that then you can incrementally go ahead and following the Colab add more pieces to the application. But this one, deliberately, I decided that because the way you create a standalone application is slightly different from the way you would do a normal traditional Angular application, I thought it was worthwhile taking the developer from the beginning to the end through the Colab. So the chat dialogue that I mentioned before, the former, and this is actually quite interesting. So the Colab finishes with the deployment to Google App Engine. So once you've tested the application, then you can even deploy it to an instance of Google App Engine as part of Google Cloud. Okay, all right, so if I switch back to the presentation, that's what I've already touched upon, some of these concepts. Let's go in detail one by one, and I've also included some snippets in the deck itself. Okay, so first one, you would create the application with only standalone entities. So it's a simple application, but the fact is this is actually the application when you generate it, when you create it, it's already made to be standalone, and you will see actually what it means. Basically, it means that it doesn't need an ng module. So there is no ng module in this application behind the Colab. Well, the next one, the feedback and chat component. The Colab explains how to generate a standalone component. What happens when you run the ng generate CLI command, the skeleton that it creates, the standalone true option, all the other modules that are imported. How do we start now an application without an ng module, right? It's sort of a contradiction in terms if you think about the old word, right? The old ng module word. I don't have an ng module. How do I start the application? Where we do it, we can start it and running through the Bootstrap application API, and then we'll see actually how really easy it is to code that. And then again, the ability to lazy load a component, just you would do for other components. So only when an action is submitted. In my case, if you remember, there is a button that says, tell me more about something. That's actually when the standalone component gets loaded. So only when the user clicks on that button. So that's when the component itself gets initialized and created. And then how we, this is actually something really nice, the next one. So the feedback and chat component has a form. Now we can, since Angular 14, we can inject rather than constructing the whole, so we can actually inject a service itself. We see the inject function. And then how we can add custom schemas the way you would do normally. Because why this? Because as I said, I had to include the Dialogflow Messenger custom schema. It's all custom, and so I actually had to think about a way to basically literally shut, like sort of mute all the errors behind that. So that's through the schemas, custom schemas, and then finally run test and finally deploy standalone application to Google App Engine. Okay, so this is the first topic. Nothing has changed in this respect, at least for now. So this is how you would normally create the application through the ng command. What happens next is actually what marks the difference between before and after, between a standalone context and a non-standalone context. So immediately after, what I did, I removed the root module, so the app module TS file. That obviously raises and creates a bunch of errors until we mark the app component as a standalone true. So that's the this is actually really the option that makes a difference and makes this a standalone application itself. Okay, and so the rest remains exactly the same. So we remove the ng module, and now we've got the root standalone component, and we've marked it obviously as standalone. Okay, so next, the Angular CLI team has added this new flag as part of the ng generate, and the flag is ---- standalone. So what happens behind the scenes that creates the skeleton? Once again, you see that the component is marked as a standalone. And it automatically imports the common module. So this is the component once it is generated using the ng generate command. And how do we import it? The way we would normally import it. So you see, we import in the list, see the common module, right module, and now we've also got the feedback and chat component. So this is the component itself has got this import. So starting from the common module, of course, the router module, and the feedback and chat component, which is the standalone component behind the feedback and chat widget. Okay, next. So we remove the ng module. How do we run the application? How do we start the application? So we use the Bootstrap application API that you see. It's a very, very simple function that actually takes the app component itself. So the root standalone component itself. And that is pretty much all about what we need to do to start and run the application. As far as it concerns with lazy load, as I said, in the application, the feedback and chat component gets loaded when the user clicks on their button. So that's why we've got this link button that routes to the feedback and chat component. To be able to do this, we actually have to define the routes in the main file, and we've got a path. This is the path. So this, you're obviously familiar with this. And then the next important thing now is this provide router function that takes an input. So this is a part of the Bootstrap application API. Provide as a provide router function that takes the route that we've specified before, and is just before. We only got only one route. So we only have that in our list of routes. Okay, so behind the scenes, what happens when the feedback and chat component gets loaded? So it gets loaded. It displays this nice UI. We've got a form. The form has just got 3 fields, if I'm not wrong. In fact, like it takes the full name of the user, the email, and the comments. It really, for me, it was just for demo purposes. What was important for me to show, though, is that yet another important concept that was introduced introduced as part of Angular 14, which is the ability to inject a service. So we're injecting in the standalone component, we're injecting this form builder service. So we have imported it here. It's part of Angular Forms, and now that's how we injecting it inside. So we're declaring the form builder, and then we later initialize the contact form, which is mapped to the form itself, to the UI form. As simple as that. And then, of course, I've got these two methods, the ng on init, which is the one that is actually needed to also import the Dialogflow messenger JavaScript. And well, you see it empty here just because this is actually one of the previous steps of the collab, but I haven't yet done the chat dialogue connection here. And then you submit, which just displays a nice friendly message in the UI as part of the form submission, and then it resets it, and then it resets the form. So what's important here, food point, is the this inject function that it really removes the need for a constructor. Okay, the Dialogflow messenger to work, it requires the JavaScript, as I said. The problem is the JavaScript itself, it obviously raises a bunch of errors because it's a custom element schema. So we need to be able, in the standalone component itself, to say, please support, as part of the schemas, please support these custom element schemas. It took me a little while to figure it out, but it actually wasn't much about the schemas. It was more like how to load the JavaScript itself with without loading in the index HTML, so as part of the startup of the application itself, but with the lazy loader of the component, with the lazy load of the UI. It's all explained in the Colab. And oh, there it is. That's exactly what I'm talking about. So this is what I do in the ng on init, just because I need to load the chat script, which activates the DF messenger element. I did want to make it full lazy loaded. So not just the component itself, but also the messenger, the chat dialogue when the component got loaded. And this is just a script that I need to download from Dialogflow console. Run, test, and finally deploy a standalone Angular application to Google App Engine. Well, it's all wrapped. So the application is wrapped as a Node.js application. Being a Node.js application, it needs a server JSON file, server.js, and this is basically what happens when the application starts. It literally just sends a request to the photo gallery that I've built, and that's why the dist and the index.html. So once the server.js has been defined, what we need to do is to specify, please start as a start of the application, run this command, which is node server.js, which starts the node node application. There are a bunch of other things that need to be done, like configure Google App Engine, but it's all explained in the Colab. It's actually using Express. It was really straightforward for me. So just another way to integrate Angular with a couple of Google Cloud services like Dialogflow Messenger and App Engine. And I think that wraps all. This is just a collection of places where you can get started with standalone components. The Colab, really nice YouTube video. You can just go on the blog. And you can get you've got access to a bunch of resources, and that's all. Do you guys have any questions? Am I still not? No, I'm not. Okay. I see questions in the chat. Let me open the chat. It's the first time I learned about Google Labs. Oh, nice. Yeah. So Constantine, yeah, they are. They're my favorite ones. I find them really intuitive. It took me more to think about it than actually to create it and implement it. There's a lot. There's a lot that goes on into writing a call up. I actually wrote. A Medium article about making the code lab. You can if you're curious to know what goes around that, you can find it on Medium. It's like when you know like that making the video of the video itself. So that was if you're curious about that, you can find that out. Okay, so implementation level of what are main advantages and standalone compared to NG modules. Well, so as far as I am concerned, I think, as I said at the beginning, the way I created the application and the way I created the component itself and the way I lazy loaded it and the way I started it, it was really intuitive. I don't know if it would have been the same using NG modules. Now, of course, that doesn't mean that we cannot incrementally add standalone components and directives and type into an existing NG module application to the old, well, not old, but yeah, NG module applications. But I think it's worth experimenting with that because it actually makes a lot easier to figure out the dependencies themselves and what actually dependencies a component requires. Yeah, okay, and so not bleed lows in almost 9, so it improves the performance of the app. I cannot elaborate around that, but I would suppose it does. I haven't done any stress test or anything like that to compare, but I think that's a really good question.
I left a comment there. It's going to be very low, like very small difference, mostly in the bundle size. Maybe transitively you can, this could stack up and you can have like slightly bigger difference and it can impact compile time, reduced a little bit if you're using only standalone components, but it's not going to be a significant difference.
Okay, thanks, Miko. Might reduce the bundle size of your apps. That's a good point. Implement it with your might both. That's an overview. Just might start. Oh God, this is going so fast. Do you think standalone components will become the default use or will it stay? That's a really good question. Minko, do you want to take that too?
Yeah, we are thinking that, we're still evaluating their usage. Potentially, we're going to flip the default value of the standalone flag to true, which is, we're considering actually doing in the next year or two, but we'll still want to evaluate the usage through the Angular CLI telemetry.
Awesome. Thanks.
There was another question. I try to filter out the questions of the chat for you. Will Angular 16 come with a way to start a fully bootstrapped application with standalone components?
That's the goal, yeah. Yeah, that's the goal. Engineer should have a standalone option. We are working on schematics there.
Awesome.
If we haven't answered the question, is there's actually a way on Zoom to dump all the questions? So maybe we can even go through them offline. I don't know if that's possible.
Yeah, that's also possible. If you want, I can read 2 additional ones for you. And then we can move on with Minko's part. Is this fine with you? Or do you want to answer them afterwards?
Maybe because I originally planned to have about an hour for the presentation. Maybe we can go through my roadmap part of the presentation and we can answer questions at the end.
Awesome.
And also,
awesome.
wherever we can't answer, I'll be happy to move it to either Twitter or the Angular Discord, whatever you prefer.
Yeah,
Cool.
sounds like
Sounds
a good plan. Okay, well, I can stay another five minutes. Unfortunately, at 6:45, I'll have to drop off. But over to Minko.
Okay, Alessia, thanks for this awesome presentation.
No, thank you for having me. Really, really appreciate it. It was refreshing.
Same wise. And yeah,
Great.
Minko, stage is yours.
Definitely. Cheers, guys. Thank you.
Figure out how to share my screen.
I think I'll have to give control over to you. No, I don't think so. No. I can try it.
All right, I'll have to quit and reopen Zoom. Sorry about that.
Oh, bugger, you can't see the share screen. You can't see the share screen green button. You can't.
I see it, but I had to update my privacy settings.
Mac OS. Are you using Mac?
Yeah. I'll be right back.
Oh, okay.
In like 30 seconds, hopefully.
Well, while we wait for him, let me write down the URL so you can go straight to the code lab. Okay, this is it. Mac Live, love it. Okay. Medium.
All right. Do you hear do you see me and hear me and see my screen? All right,
Yeah,
good.
perfect.
Yeah, something happened with my microphone selection also. So at Google, we usually have a restriction. We can't use Zoom, but we bent the rules. So we managed to get Zoom access, and some things don't work all the time. So yeah, my name is Minko. I lead the product for Angular and Devrel, and today I'm going to share a little bit with you on what we have been working on and what we'll be working on primarily in 2023. So far in 2022, we shipped version 14, 15, and also 15.1. And some of the biggest landings were around top features that developers have requested, such as strictly typed forms. We also introduced the directive composition API, which allows you now to add directives on top of host elements. We introduced the Angular material, MDC components in version 15. Standalone components that Alessia presented are now out of developer preview. And we worked on the ng optimized image components, actually directive with Chrome. In version 15.1 that we released recently, we introduced self-closing component tags. This is mostly developer ergonomics improvement. It's not going to impact the size of your bundles. And it's just going to allow you to type a little bit less. But we have been working on such quality of life improvements together with some major big initiatives. So what is next? I often get questions on what are you going to ship as part of version 16 or version 17? What is going to land when? And this is a question that we can't really answer because we want to take our time to implement the features in a way that we feel good about. We would like to make sure they're stable and they deliver a developer experience that you'd expect them to do. So that's why we ship them once they're ready, rather than couple them to a particular release. This allows us to ship releases with predictive schedule, which means that you know that version 16 is going to be out somewhere in May. So you can plan your updates for then. But we are not really sure what features it's going to contain. We're just sure that it's going to contain minimum amount of breaking changes and automated migrations with the Angular CLI. So to see what we're actually working on, you can check the Angular roadmap at angular.io/guide/roadmap. And in this presentation, I'm going to share with you what is the main focus for us in 2023. So the top two initiatives that we're working on are reactivity and server-side rendering. Reactivity is a really massive one because Angular has its own change detection model, which in fact was borrowed pretty much from AngularJS back in the day, with just some improvements around speed of the way we traverse the componentry and detect changes, and also the way we trigger change detection. But it has been always pull-based. We have been checking for updates, for changes in the view model, and we have been updating the view. Now we want to revisit this. And even though this is going to be very fundamental change in how Angular works, we're not anticipating any breaking changes or any backward incompatible API changes at all. Around server-side rendering, even though we have universal, it can use some improvements around many areas, developer experience, and even performance. So I'm going to dig a little bit more in depth in these two focus areas in the next couple of slides. So reactivity. I would say that the top 4 main landings in reactivity are going to be about an alternative reactivity model. We're exploring another way to enable updates of your view based on model changes. And with this, we're going to ship many features as well. It is going to allow us to provide APIs for computed properties and also better interoperability with RxJS. A problem for us has been that RxJS is kind of a core part of Angular, but not really. The framework doesn't depend too much on RxJS, even though forms, router, and HTTP have strong dependency on RxJS. We're not very opinionated if you should be using RxJS. But at the same time, we provide it as part of the default setup in NGNU. And there are 2 competing paradigms around reactivity there. I'm going to talk about this in just a little bit. Another thing is that we'd like to make Zone.js optional. Zone.js has been part of Angular since 2016, since version 2.0, and it has been enabling us to run change detection once we think that the model might have changed. But over time, the JavaScript language evolved. We have now async await. These are incompatible APIs with Zone.js. And also, even though we're making some advancements in introducing zone-like APIs in the JavaScript standard, it is not there yet. So you have to always bring a couple of kilobytes for a zone polyfill. And that's something that would ideally not want you to do. Additionally, the change detection in Angular has been global, and we would like to make it a little bit more local. I have a couple of slides specifically for that. So what is reactivity? Because that's a really overloaded concept, especially in the JavaScript community, especially on Twitter. Everyone has their own definition, and some people get really opinionated about what reactivity means in the context of their own framework. Like generally, if you look at academic articles, reactivity is just propagation of change. Once one of the variables in your expression changes, you would like this change to be propagated throughout the entire calculation so that you can get new result based on the new values of the variables. And when we're talking about reactivity in the context of a front-end framework, and we look into implementation details, there are usually 2 main, let's say, 2 main phases of this reactivity. The first one is when something is going to get calculated, how we're going to get notified that something has changed. And the second one is how this recalculation is going to happen. For instance, in Angular, when something is going to be recalculated very much depends on Zone.js. We use Zone.js to check when the microtask queue of the browser is empty. And when the microtask queue of the browser is empty, we run change detection over the entire component tree. And how do we run change detection? Well, we compile templates to JavaScript. We take all the dynamic blocks of your templates and we detect them for changes. And when we detect a change, we update only the DOM nodes that have actually required to be updated. So these are the 2 phases. First, when the microtask queue is empty, we run change detection over the entire component tree, unless you have modified the change detection through different change detection strategies, such as on push, for instance, or you're using custom Zone.js implementation. Another example will be in React, for example. In React, you're going to run the reconciliation, the React change detection, once you call like set state, the different set state calls buffer eventually. You're going to run after that reconciliation algorithm. So you're going to build the virtual DOM in memory. You're going to compare it with the previous version, and you're going to update the nodes that have changed. So in all the frameworks, if you look at them, they have these two phases. Something that we'd like to change here is when the change detection is going to be run. Ideally, we would not want to run it after the microtask queue is empty, and ideally we would not want to run it over the entire component tree. Angular is really fast if you think about it. If you have component tree with thousands of components and we run change detection every single time when you change your model and we don't drop frames, this means that the way we're updating the view is pretty efficient, but we are not running change detection the most optimal number of times. Another thing, which is really common in the reactivity paradigms, is push versus pull. These are pretty much the two main ways to implement reactivity. You can pull for changes, what Angular does, performs dirty checking, or you can get changes pushed to you. And in Angular, we have these two competing paradigms playing together, which sometimes creates suboptimal developer experience. In the new reactivity initiatives that we're exploring, we'd like to enable push-based reactivity, which from the start means that there is going to be a better interoperability with RxJS, since you'll be able to just create an adapter from the Angular's reactivity that plays really well with RxJS. This doesn't mean that we're going to go full in with RxJS, because personally, I see RxJS a little bit as regular expressions. You can write something really smart that you might not be able to read like 2 months after, because this very dense semantics, piping a couple of operators could be really hard to reason about once you have implemented the smart logic. But at the same time, for people who are expert in RxJS and they want to use it with Angular, we would like to enable, we would like to make sure it plays better with the framework. So we're hoping that with this new reactivity model, we're first going to enable more advanced usages of RxJS, but also for folks who prefer to not use RxJS, they'll be able to do so by using the Angular's built-in reactivity primitives with a more imperative, less declarative model. All right. Now, talking about the change detection today. I mentioned that we have the component tree in Angular, and once the microtask queue of the browser is empty, we perform change detection over this entire component tree. So we check every single of these nodes. And with large component trees, this could be slow. Eventually, your component tree is going to have thousands of nodes. And even though the calculations that we're doing to detect for changes in each individual node are pretty fast, well, you're going to reach certain limit and we will not be able to perform this change detection in 16 milliseconds. So you're going to start dropping frames. To optimize this further, we'd like to localize the change detection. The changes that have happened in your model. So once you set the state in your component, we'd like to track down all the dependencies, all the components that depend on the state, and run change detection only within them. This is going to be something that we are hoping to land later this year, hopefully around November or so, but it's hard to commit to deadlines because we'd like to do a lot of validation in the meantime. We'd like to run experiments with existing applications, talk to developers, collect feedback, and see whether these APIs actually really make sense. All right, I'm going to spend the next couple of minutes talking about server-side rendering, because I'm pretty excited that we finally put some more attention, gave a little bit more attention of this side of the framework. The couple of main initiatives around server-side rendering that we're working on are non-destructive hydration. I'm going to discuss this in more detail in a little bit. Some usability improvements around Domino and ESM. For example, with Domino, we would like to just make sure that we're keeping Domino up to date with the evolving JavaScript and HTML standards, because Domino has been our adapter that we're using for like DOM implementation on the server side. And it is a project that has not been really well maintained over the past couple of years. So we would like to figure out what we're going to do there. Are we going to fork it? Are we going to just contribute upstream and eventually become one of the maintainers? That's something that we're going to figure out in the next couple of weeks. In addition to this, we'd like to enable you to use Angular Universal with ECMAScript modules and ultimately run Universal in different runtimes. So currently you can run it in Node.js, but what if you want to render in an edge worker? Domino currently doesn't really allow you to do that. So this is part of our exploration. Another big thing is that watch mode has never been optimal for Angular Universal applications. We'll have to rebuild both the server and your client separately, even though they share probably 99% of the codes together, the only difference in the Express server. So this is something that we already have a plan for, and next we're moving to execution. So hopefully you're going to see that in the next couple of months. And finally, a little bit more ambiguous project, which has a lot of unknowns, is around exploration of more fine-grained hydration. I'm going to talk about this in a little bit. But first, let's explore what non-destructive hydration is. So right now, when you server-side render and you get all this HTML, all this markup in the browser is going to build the DOM tree. After that, load all the JavaScript for your Angular application. And once Angular takes over, it is going to destroy everything and re-render it from scratch. That's really suboptimal. In terms of performance difference, I would say it's not significant, because if it doesn't matter too much whether we re-render or we traverse this entire DOM tree and we attach event listeners, we still have a blocking script that needs to perform a lot of heavy operations. At the same time, this re-rendering sometimes creates flickering that is pretty inconvenient for end users, and sometimes can create some buggy situations with Google Ads, for instance, where it counts to impressions, and just you need to figure out workarounds. So what we'd like to do with our non-destructive hydration is, once you load the JavaScript for the application, we're just going to traverse the DOM structure, create the data structures that Ivy uses, and attach event listeners. And this is also going to enable us to perform hydration on finer level of granularity, potentially, if we see that this makes sense, because this sets certain constraints on how you build your application. And we would like to make sure that we don't impact developer experience, since it's a very tricky trade-off between performance and developer experience. And we're really well familiar with this problem at Google, since we have been having a framework with very fine-grained reactivity and very fine-grained hydration for the past about 10 years. And we're constantly balancing between these two, performance and developer experience. So once we have this non-destructive hydration, we'd like to figure out how we can make it work with lazy loaded routes. Because if you think about it, once you hydrate your application, some of the routes are lazy loaded. Your scripts for these routes might not be available yet. So you have to lazily load them once you hydrate, and after that, figure out how to hydrate these routes as well. So this is going to be at a later stage of the project. A couple of other things that are coming up are around better standalone component support. There was one question in the Q&A, whether we're going to have NGNU standalone schematics, and yes, this is something that we're working on. We'd like to also ensure that standalone has universal support. We update the docs, and we also have a standalone getting started journey, which is going to be the default getting started journey that we're going to offer to developers. Material 3 is another main effort. We'd like to make sure that we align with the Material 3 spec. And the good news is that the Material 3 spec with all their tokens is out as of like 2 weeks ago or so. So we're working really closely with the Material team to align with the expressive theming API that they enable easier development of themes, and also make sure that we have complete documentation. I'm hoping we land this sometime around May or June, but very much depends on this process back and forth with the Material team. We would like to make sure that we deliver the best possible experience for developers there. After that, we would like to revisit also authoring experience. Angular is kind of a relatively new framework. I don't know, in the JavaScript community, new is a very relative concept, but it has been around for about 7 years. And since then, different things happened. We have new decorator standard that is finally going to land in JavaScript. Literally, the Angular team kicked off the decorators discussions with TC39, and it took TC39 7 years to agree on syntax and semantics. Really happy that this is finally happening, but the syntax is slightly different compared to what we originally planned. So we would like to reevaluate that. For instance, you saw that we have a new, I mean, it's not a new function, inject, but it has new semantics, which can pretty much replace dependency injection in your constructor. So we're looking into this direction, seeing how we can modernize Angular and make it simpler. And finally, we're working on a lot of tooling improvements in the language service, in the Angular CLI. We're moving to ES build and working on a variety of different developer experience improvements. There is even more that I put on the slides, but rather than reading through that, I would like to ask if you have any questions. I have about 10 more minutes, and after that, I'll have to head out for a meeting. But I'm also available on Twitter, so we can move the Q&A also online.
Awesome, awesome. So thanks, Minka. That was really a great overview of the future of Angular. There is a question from Lucio, who is asking, when this reactive primitive is done, will we be able to have a simple API for reactive variables and inputs like Svelte? Or will we have an API to convert observables and vice versa?
Yeah, that's what I was thinking about when I wrote the better interoperability with RxJS. We'll be working on reactive inputs for sure. That's one of the developer ergonomics improvements and like quality of life improvements that developers have been asking for a while now. And we closed this issue, but we have been thinking about it. And yeah, it is going to be there.
Awesome. Michael is asking, is there a way to find those slides for download?
Yeah, I can share them after a presentation. I may have to move them to my personal account, and I'll share them with Manfred.
Awesome, awesome. I'm happy to send them out. Wiley is asking, I'd like to know how the Angular team sees the new competition, specifically what Solid, Quick, and the others new kids on the block are doing.
Yeah, Solid is great. I really enjoy talking to Ryan. He's one of the most lovely people in the JavaScript community. Really constructive conversations. We're in fact involving him in some of our reactivity discussions. So I'll say rather than competition, it's more of a collaboration. Around Quick, yeah, kind of same with Mishko. You know, Mishko was part of the Angular team. So I would say it's more of a collaboration there as well. I know that Twitter can make things look rougher than they actually are, but like Mishko was at ngconf and we were discussing progressive hydration there. He has his own understanding of different constraints in Angular, which I would say are more of a just trade-offs that we'll need to make, because we have had framework with the features that Quick has at Google since 2013 or 2012, 2013, I guess it went in production. And I'm working really closely with this team as well, working between Angular and this other framework Wiz, and seeing how we can bring some of the Angular features to the other framework and bring some of the Wiz features to Angular. And I would say that developer experience could be significantly impacted if you go with resumable framework. So we would like to mitigate the risks there.
Sounds good. Sounds good. There is another question about the competition between bundling tools. And the question is, what's the future of Angular with Webpack?
Yeah, I just scheduled a tweet actually over the weekend that like I'm going to share all about that, but I can do that here now too. So Angular has been working on moving from Webpack to ES-Build for, I would say, about a year now. It is taking a long time, but the good thing is that after we remove the ng-eject experience, now there are fewer dependencies, public dependencies on Webpack. So what we can do is just completely replace the build pipeline, switch to ES-Build, and just all the applications will be using a faster bundler. So that's what's going on there. We didn't go with Vite for a couple of reasons. One of them is that it has single file compilation model. And if we would like to provide templates, if we would like to Angular's altering experience to be with templates, we can't support single file compilation. We can move to TSX. Nothing stops us to moving to TSX, but like, do we want to do that? Not sure. So we'll have to do a lot of thinking there. And another thing is also that with the Angular CLI, we have something called like Architect, which is kind of the Angular builders. They're implementing a lot of the features that Vite provides, especially around executing kind of different parts of your build pipeline. So what we did was we talked to Evan New, who built Vite, and we got some inspiration from there, and we're moving to ES-Build, which is in the core of Vite right now. About TurboPack, it's a brand new tool. It's just a couple of months old, and we'd like to make sure we provide stable experience. We don't want to go with the new bundler that folks develop every other, like a few times a year.
Cool. Yuri is asking, with SSR improvements, especially fine-grained hydration, is the goal to head towards something like resumability that Quick proposes?
Well, we would like to evaluate how does this look like, because resumability just sets some constraints on how you build your applications. If you look at Quick, for example, it's because it's like a public example that you can use today, it sets some constraints. For example, you have lazily loadable event handlers, and this changes the way you're building apps. So we would like to see how this impacts developer experience. And we would like to potentially enable something like that in the future, but I would say it's not on our immediate roadmap. But we're definitely exploring and looking into that. That's what I said around the collaboration with Angular and Wiz. That's what I'm thinking about on a day-to-day basis, and we'll see where it goes.
Okay, awesome. Well, someone is asking, I think you already answered this question, is it the goal to make Zone.js optional or just dispose it in the future?
Yeah, we're going to make it optional. I'm sure we're going to continue maintaining it probably forever, because there are hundreds of thousands of applications depending on Zone.js. And even though we maintain it, we're going to maintain it for a long time. We are going to also enable this alternative path that enables you to use change detection without Zone. So yeah. If in the future we see a future for sure, which is a couple of months from now, in which we'll be able to develop applications without using Zone.js at all, and it's not going to look awkward. It's going to feel natural. That's the improvement. That's why we're spending so much time designing this experience.
Sounds like music to my ears. Mark is asking, will there be an alternative to pipes like memorization Angular? It would be nice to call methods like pure functions in the future. Is there something in the pipeline for this?
Pipes like memorization, like pipes, they have memorization built in pure pipes.
Yeah, and I think the question is if it is possible or it will be possible to do memorization in a different way, for instance, by calling a special kind of function within the template.
Yeah, so there are a few things. I mean, pipes with memorization, they will continue working. And also the computed properties that I mentioned that the new reactivity model is going to enable. It provides memorization to a way. An expression is not going to be recomputed unless its dependencies change. So it's very much the same concept. It's going to look slightly different than pipes. It's not going to be embedded within the template. It's going to be very similar to computed properties in other frameworks. Computed properties in frameworks rather than JavaScript, because there is a difference there.
Awesome. Is it safe to switch over to the ES build option currently? Or is it risky to use it for production?
Yeah, also we don't have ng-serve with ES build just yet, so it's not ready. But if you want to give it a try with your projects and you profile, you benchmark, and or if something breaks, you open an issue in the Angular CLI repository, that's going to be really valuable for us. So feel free to give it a try. It's easy to opt in.
Awesome.
Yeah. Okay. If you have any other questions, you can always find me online at mgetchev. So feel free to follow up there with questions. Or if there is another way that you're answering questions offline in the meetup, I'd love to adjust and help. And also would love to hear your feedback, because I talked a lot about a lot of things, but also if you think that there is something more urgent that we need to be working on that we're not seeing, and we're focused on something that is not too high priority for you, not a big pain point, this will be really valuable feedback. So, and I would love to hear your thoughts.
Awesome. Yeah, thanks, Minko. This was really awesome to have you. Great talk, great answers. And I'm really looking forward to this future of Angular.
Have a good night.
Good night. Bye-bye, Minko. Oh, and by the way, I just saw that some people were asking questions about module federation because it's somehow bound to Webpack. And yeah, my goal is, it is one of my current projects to migrate module federation so that it will work with this upcoming ES build builder. If you look at my blog, you will find some ideas about this. And these ideas are called native federation. Some people ask about this when the topic of ES build builder came up. Okay, cool. So thanks for joining us. We really had a huge amount of people in here. It was a pleasure to have you today here, and yeah, enjoy the rest of the evening. See you around. Bye-bye.
Ciao, Manfred. Danke. See you.
See you. Pleasure.
Tschüss.
Tschüss mit Ü.